Hello, hello. This is Alex Burkett, the co-founder of Omniscient Digital, a premium content marketing agency, and relevantly, the host of this very podcast that you're listening to right now, the Long Game Podcast. So before we get started with the episode, I've got a really quick ask for you. If you're enjoying the podcast, would you please rate and review us on whichever app you're using, whether that's Apple, Spotify, whatever. A very quick couple sentence review would be amazing. Tell us what you like, what you don't like, any feedback. Please submit a guest request, and I'll reach out and interview them. Content marketing leader, business leader, anybody you respect that think would be an interesting conversation. Basically, I know how to grow a content marketing program, but I know very little about growing a podcast. The one thing I do know is that ratings and reviews really help us. They really matter. They help us rank when people are searching for stuff on a given podcast app. So by doing so, you're just really helping us get off the ground and reach more people. So pitch over, that's it. Today I'm talking to Ross Hudgens. Ross runs Siege Media, my favorite content marketing agency that isn't my own content marketing agency. Therefore, I guess my second favorite content marketing agency. He's also a friend and a fellow Austinite. That is, a person who lives in Austin, Texas, where I live. In this conversation, I ask him all sorts of questions, personally that I wanted to learn about how he's grown his agency to 100 plus employees. You'll learn how they do marketing for their clients as well as for their own firm, how they think about thought leadership, personal branding, and different marketing channels to grow a services business, why they chose to be design-centric in their positioning, and how they've changed their SEO and content practices while moving more upmarket with their clients and chasing bigger and bigger brands and logos. Ross also teaches me some pretty nifty frameworks, like how he uses AIDA, that is AIDA, typically a copywriting framework, how he uses that for writing blog post intros as well as outreach emails, and KOB, keyword opposition to benefits analysis, and how he predicts which blog posts are going to be passive backlink assets that produce links without active manual outreach. So as you can imagine, this conversation is a mini masterclass in content marketing. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Ross Hudgens. So we could start high level. I'm curious, like now, how many employees do you have at Siege?
We're like 110 now.
110. So what's a day in the life look for you at 110 employees?
So recently made a pretty major shift there. I we promoted an internal VP of operations into a COO role. So I was doing pretty much everything, finance, operations, even marketing. Had started to get someone's help in sales and that side of things. Drew Page on our team, but it was pretty split, and then kind of realized, honestly, it was like starting to feel miserable for me. It was like very stressful. I'm not good. I was doing a bad job at operations. So I ended up splitting. I realized, hey, I enjoy this content marketing SEO thing, or this is what it originally was. And she's better at that than I am. So hopefully the best 1-2 punch to now focus on content, which for us means learning and development and marketing. So I think there's a real Venn diagram there for agencies, or at least for us anyways, where I can help train the team and also use that same material to market us is kind of the goal. We'll see how it goes.
And marketing for you is you run a podcast, you're doing blogging on Siege. What else does that entail?
Yeah, that's pretty much the spiel. Podcasts, blogging, Twitter, pretty much, yeah, whatever the format kind of applies to. Speaking, this.
Is this what you gravitate towards naturally? Because you mentioned the operations thing, and I'm grateful that I have a co-founder that's really good and enjoys doing the operational aspects. It's a definite weak part of my skill set. So I get to focus on talking into a microphone, writing tweets and doing sales, which I love, and coming up with new ideas. So have you identified like your kind of core strength, and like also if that aligns with your interest?
Yeah. I mean, it took me a while. I thought, hey, I think I'm enjoying this other thing. And I think I did. And there was just kind of a breaking point of once you're just a certain size that you need the experts. But yeah, I sort of did identify over time. It's like, what brings me joy? It's kind of like focus, writing, thinking about search, content marketing, and marketing, like, and what am I uniquely going to be able to add value at? And it's probably marketing for us that I couldn't easily just hand to someone else. So that was a part of that kind of led to that process. But it sounds like you're doing a smart job there.
Yeah, it's like, well, for us, it started out, fully part-time. Like we were all HubSpot employees together. So we're like, there's no feasible way we can stretch ourselves this thinly and actually make this work. So I think as a forcing function, it really made us focus on what we uniquely can do. And then to divvy that up among the other co-founders, among like, all right, what are among us three, like what are the things we can only uniquely do? And then everything else we try to outsource and automate, delegate, et cetera. So it became sort of a forcing function early on, which I think has been beneficial as we've grown a little bit too, because now we do have, I don't want to call them swim lanes, but we definitely have those core focus areas.
Yeah, and that's a pro of having co-founders. Obviously, there's pros and cons to all this stuff, but that you can do that is awesome, and I'm sure is helpful to clearly have everyone do what they are best at from start.
How long have you been running Siege?
9.5 years. So next August is our 10th anniversary, which I'm excited about. Knock on wood, making it too.
Hell yeah, that's amazing. Can I ask a high level question on that? This is fresher for us and a little bit longer ago for you. Why did you start a content agency in the first place?
Yeah, so I'm an SEO at the core, really. So when I originally started, Google Penguin had just happened. Are you familiar with that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so Penguin was an update that basically changed how links are perceived. And I was a link builder. I was kind of known as that originally, and branding myself as that on the side and like running a blog about that. And I saw that hit, and I had a manager who micromanaged me, and I was not a fan of that. So quit and kind of had been doing this blogging thing on the side, was sort of known for link building. So I kind of felt like I knew how to do content marketing and knew the SEO and link building side, and kind of saw the world going that direction of Google wants real content marketing, not just gray hat links. So kind of had some nice timing to kind of go in that direction of the search side of things with content. And yeah, sort of started as link building and has gone more and more to just like top funnel, middle funnel, brand awareness, and still tying in links, huge part, but kind of has progressed from that over time.
So you were doing link building where you were working for somebody else at the time, or was this a freelance thing, or what was that like?
Yeah, I worked for a company called Full Beaker, which ran its own mortgage and insurance and finance lead gen sites. So my job was kind of build those websites from scratch. And a huge component was link building to kind of like rank for a lot of mortgage terms like streamline refinance, VA home loan, and Medicare supplemental insurance, like stuff like that were the kind of websites I would build with the help of the team. And yeah, there's huge link building component because they were smaller websites, still content component, but because they were smaller, it was just like mostly link heavy lifting that I was helping with. And yeah, I was lucky to work there because the founder was a VC who invested in companies like Minted and I Can Has Cheeseburger.
Oh yeah,
it's very
I remember that.
Yeah, Edward Yim really, he's really under the radar, so probably shouldn't even say his name out loud, but he went to Harvard, super smart guy, and allowed me to basically just run, and he just trusted you. And it was like an entrepreneurial environment, and then was lucky to be able to, that changed, but didn't realize I kind of was like running a business in a way before I actually did.
Cool. So you saw some trends coming in terms of like how content was shifting, and then you thought, all right, I'm going to jump and do this on my own. Was that initial jump scary? Like, how did you make that jump? And then two, how did you get your first couple clients and get the business off the ground back in those days?
Yeah, it was scary, but I imagine this might sound familiar to you, but or potentially familiar, but I was hustling on the side and basically working and writing blog posts. I would work 9 to 5 and was kind of socially isolated, but 5 to midnight, I'd be writing blog posts, creating content, and really making momentum on my personal brand to generate clients on the side, and started getting the first couple of clients. So back in those days, a few sites had gotten hit by Penguin, And I commented on Moz.com when they had a big comment section and got a few clients that way, and had enough to basically I could keep the lights on, had like 20,000 in my bank account, maybe like 30,000 or something. And felt like if I announced that I had quit my job because I had built this thing on the side, I could hopefully generate a few clients from that. And sure enough, I did do that and was able to do that. And worst case scenario is one of those things for anyone who is thinking about doing this stuff, especially if you start working on a personal brand on the side. And all of our skill sets in this marketing, SEO, content side are so highly sought after that worst case scenario, I would have just gotten another job. The world doesn't end. You just get another job. Probably.
That's good to hear. I mean, obviously there's, extenuating circumstances, but that's something that of course we've gone through as well. And I keep telling myself that rational brain side is like, all right, well, 6 months from now, if this all fails, like you're still going to be hireable. Right. But I think like on the emotional side, it's harder. So it's like, once you take that leap, I think it becomes palpable and you understand that. But before you take that leap, it's like, oh shit, what happens if this goes to zero?
Yeah, I mean, and in your scenario with other co-founders and things like that, it's like, yeah, you have other people riding with you too. So that's like even scarier, and like multiple things to kind of weigh and make sure it goes well. But yeah, you're right. I was definitely scared. I was not like super confident by any means. But that's the beauty of like doing stuff on the side and building a personal brand. Like it gives you that confidence. Because I don't think it's a good idea to just like quit and start an agency without any of that started. But agency is about thought leadership and that kind of stuff and building trust from clients. So for probably a huge percentage of us, going that route makes sense, I would think.
So when did you know, it sounded like you were starting off on your own, doing some freelancing, picking up some clients. When did you know it was time to go from that and then hire employees and scale it into a full-fledged agency?
Yeah, I think I had been going for about 6 months to a year, starting to get more lead flow, and that was going well. And at a certain point, I just started asking myself, like, what are these things are the best use of my time? And some of it wasn't, and felt like we had enough revenue coming in that effectively if a percentage of that could go to a new hire and have it be like an entry level content marketing person, not be the riskiest thing in the world. And it felt right at that point where enough was in, built a little more headway in terms of like money in the bank. And that combination made it feel a little less risky. I think I started with like a contract with someone and then transition to full time. So it felt like 6-month contract or something. You create some kind of temporary non-permanence. I think that also helps your psychology a little, or so I remember. Anyways, it's been a while.
Right. Well, there's something terrifying about going full on with, multiple employees that suddenly you're responsible for. So the more you can, temper that with some sort of like fail safe, the better. And in terms of at least starting out and getting off the ground.
For sure.
Who did you hire like first, second, and third, like as you were starting to scale? Again, these are all selfish questions. I'm just really trying to learn for our own agency here. So
you might know one of the people, but first person was Brian Vu. Very lucky to meet him. He like set some expectation for us. He was a content marketing specialist. And then we tried to find a writer. So Brian was a great outreach person. He did a lot of outreach, just traditional for us. And then we thought it would complement with a writer at the time. And we hired Barbara Holbrook, who's still with us today, as a senior front-end developer. Turns out she was just a very talented developer. So we got super lucky getting a developer that just happened to be like multi-skilled. Barbara's amazing and still with us and like brings that same care. And our third hire was Scott Tousley, who is of HubSpot as well. Very lucky to have found him and was awesome. I think we got him to move from Michigan State, or maybe he just wanted to live in San Diego. I forget, but he was content marketer as well. And at that time, it was kind of like more writing and roundups. And then I found you didn't ask about the fourth one, but the fourth one was a friend from college who used to be my roommate, and it's just an amazing designer. And that kind of like complemented things where he brought design into our equation and kind of got the full suite of what is now our content marketing in like 4 people.
So you were doing a lot of the content in-house, like you were hiring the writers for Siege and they were writing for the clients. You weren't outsourcing to freelancers or different subject matter experts. It was centralized.
Correct. Yeah. So we're pretty centralized in that way. We'll outsource some things, but kind of what makes us different than I'm guessing your positioning and many B2B companies is that we're many B2B focused agencies is we're very design focused.
Right, right.
So we have 35 people on our team, maybe going on 40 are designers, and that tends to skew more B2C and visual and inspirational and that kind of route as compared to deep subject matter expert B2B, or at least that's kind of how I've seen it sort of flesh out anyways.
Yeah, so I mean this as a compliment, but that's pretty strange for a content marketing agency to be design focused. How did you come about that? Like, how did you think through that positioning?
Good question. I mean, in some ways it's probably kind of just evolved from what started to work. I wonder how many agencies actually deliberately figure this. They probably do figure it out over time, but I think we started as link building, right? And the component of that day one was like infographics, was this old school way of doing things. You give people shareable visual elements and they'll be more likely to link to you. So that was definitely an early impetus. And then I think that kind of just progressed we brought on photographers, videographers, very illustrators and all of that. And it kind of we still will do infographics, but it's more like great visual assets on page. And still the great copy and copy editing, but that will still be a big component of what we do.
That's fascinating. Yeah, I can definitely see the natural progression from the link building focus, especially with your personal background and experience, leading into the design focus being, I mean, most linkable assets tend to be image based, or at least many do anyway, even like informational content. Something I'm thinking through a lot nowadays because of my, relationship with Pep, who he's all about like product positioning and like product marketing, right? Like how to win in undifferentiated markets. And I'm like drinking a liquid death right now in possibly the most crowded space, right? It's like sparkling water. There's a million brands out there. So it's like, how do we stand out? That's something I think a lot about for our content agency. And I guess like what I've come up with is people buy us typically because we emphasize, ROI driven content. Like it's kind of like tying our results to business metrics. I think there's a few agencies. I think you guys do that in terms of your positioning, but I don't think that's typically been the focus for how content agencies work with clients. And then I would say that people tend to stay with us because of our link building and our network that we've built through kind of editorial style link building, guest posts, and all that stuff. So a high level question is today, and design's part of that, but what do you consider your strategic edge agency wise, like your secret weapon? Like why do people hire Siege and stay with Siege over others?
Yeah, good question. I think our design team is great. So we have, I'm biased, but world-class designers. So we are pretty upmarket at this junction. So I think we have a team that effectively can nail high quality brand aesthetics pretty consistently. So it's not that easy to just hire a designer who can nail Casper or some of these like high quality brands. It's not that simple to do that and bring that in. So that's the differentiator. You mentioned relationships. We have, I say like, technically the numbers are over 8,000 plus relationships we've built out from sending hundreds of emails each day. So we have a ton of those publisher relationships that we now have in a database across pretty much the entire internet. We now have outreach technology, which allows us to do that and prospect faster than other people.
This is home built, like you guys built a tool for yourselves?
Correct.
Nice.
Yeah, so that's more recent. We've just kind of added to the stack over time, experience in each of these verticals. So we now definitely have just compounding momentum of great case studies and a lot of these verticals we play in all the time. So it's relatively simple. If you're in insurance, if any insurance company comes to us, we feel pretty confident we have several case studies that if you're that company, it'd be like, why wouldn't I work with Siege at that point? But obviously I'm biased, but that's sort of how it feels currently in terms of our advantage.
With the link building advantage, that's interesting because it's somewhat similar to how we do it. Do you explain that to clients, like, or prospects, I guess, like during the sales process? Like, because I feel like one of the most common questions I get is like, how do you guys get links? Just because people have been burned so many times by these like cheap link buying firms, but I never explicitly know how to explain that in like one or two small graphics or like a one pager. So is that something you guys dive into during the sales calls, the sales process, or is that something that the client just feels throughout the relationship?
Yeah, we do. I mean, we share sort of the process. We've gotten a few quotes about we're very brand friendly in terms of how we pitch. So that is part of it because we are pitching higher quality brands. We share the logos to be like, you're a high quality logo. We have worked with high quality logos and we'll protect that as part of it. We are increasingly, as we've progressed, and I talked about like we did infographics day one. Now we're helping people rank for passive link assets. And that's more and more of what we're doing as well, and narrating in terms of like, we're good at search. We can get you ranking for things, and we want to help build an engine for you of link acquisition, not just manual, because it's more cost effective. So there are several touch points we discuss in sales for sure.
Can you explain passive link assets?
Yeah. So passive link asset, I mean, there's a few common trends, but effectively it's like a something with high view to link ratio. So there could be trend pieces, stats pieces. There's random things that do this, like calculators, which is where we have dev team as well. That's a differentiator because we build interactives. Like even stuff like a recent vertical I looked at, foods high in vitamin D. Like foods high in blank is just a high passive link intent asset, where if you go out and build those early and you know how to rank for them, you'll build kind of a compounding snowball where you can get other things ranking. So it's effectively, just looking at the search volume and opportunity, but also keeping an eye on the ball of like, what are the page level links those have? And you can often find low hanging fruit because they're low. People won't notice them because they're low search volume. It could have like 200 searches a month, but those could all be reporters and bloggers looking to find a credible thing to add to their article. And if you rank for that, you just build an engine, or at least help build an engine in that way.
How do you identify passive link asset opportunities? Like, how do you reverse engineer that and see what's already ranking and getting a bunch of links via like Ahrefs or something? Or is it more so like intuition and pattern recognition? Like I could probably say like, all right, keyword statistics, like people who are searching that are probably looking to cite something in a blog post. And I may not need to reverse engineer that. Do you guys have a framework for how you find those?
Yeah, I mean, a common one is quick answers. So if it's like if you're searching something and you're looking for a single sentence or framework that you could copy and paste, that's probably a passive link asset. So examples are like cost is a framework that also is middle funnel and high search intent or high link intent, because they're like the cost to remodel a bathroom or something. Someone will link to that range and link to you. Definitions in the B2B space are just massive, where people are looking at jargon terms like what is content marketing, what is blank, and they'll reference that definition a ton and link to you. So that's a pretty common framework. Is there something they can copy and paste? If that's the case, that could be a strong passive link intent, especially if it's non-obvious in some way.
That's cool. Yeah. So I think like I found this trend that these passive link assets are also really good fodder for link building themselves, like manual link building. We've always referred to it as buzzworthy content in kind of opposition to product-led content. We had to attach a buzzword to it, right? Like product-led growth. You got to have your framework, right? There's the pillar and cluster.
You do.
We got product-led growth or product-led content and buzzworthy content. But we started doing this as part of a portfolio exercise where, depending on the stage of the company, like if they're already a 80, 90 domain rating, it's like we could probably just write high intent content and they're going to rank for it pretty easily. And then like lower domain rating startups, we tend to do a lot more buzzworthy stuff and actually use that as part of our link building outreach. Have you seen sort of a crossover in terms of like passive link assets also being good fodder for your outreach if you're still doing that for clients?
Yes, for sure. And I would agree with you. Like if you're on the lower DR side, we were using Ahrefs now internally, or DA.
Mhm.
We'll need to associate outreach with that more and more. If you are those big brands that can rank for things out of the gates, we might not even recommend outreach for them. They'd obviously love to not do anything manual, ideally, but some of those topics don't have link intent. Like when I think of off top or outreach intent. So we had clients in moving, like moving statistics. No blogger wants to cover just not really, unless it's like a trend piece, just general moving statistics. But we did something on customer service statistics that was big and interactive, and people did. That's broad enough that it was pitchable, and that one we was link worthy, and we also made it big enough too. So there's always that kind of balance of you can't just do it by default, but if it's big, interactive, custom illustrations, all of those things that kind of help pass the threshold anyways in our experience.
So you mentioned that you moved upmarket to an extent. I'm curious.
Yeah.
So there's many, I guess, like benefits of that. Like the domain rating scale is one of them, right? You can rank for things a lot easier, more difficult keywords. But I'm curious to the flip side of that. Have there been forcing functions or things you've had to eliminate from your typical content strategy just by the sheer necessity of working with these big brands?
Good question. In terms of elimination, we're trying to eliminate outreach where it's possible. And I think that is more and more common with big brands. With big brands, things just take longer. We're less likely to be able to do interactives. There'll often be limitations. Some things the Venn diagram of like big link bait doesn't even really exist for them anyway. So it's like tough to really make something that's going to go viral for these public companies because they wouldn't want to be represented in that way. So not that I increasingly don't think that's a good idea anyways, but I don't know if that's that helpful, but trying to do less manual things is very often the case, and things just take longer. No, even in the act of publishing content, because they have strict brand restrictions, which isn't necessarily a terrible thing. It's just we notice on average, like you could add 10 to 20% time to the same blog post simply because someone else is going to need to review it. There's probably going to, on average, be one more edit round. Those kinds of things are kind of common the more and more upmarket you go.
Yeah. I think, I think this was implicit in there, but like some of the scrappier tactics seem to be less or a little bit more taboo once your brand gets to a certain scale. So I know at HubSpot, like I came from startups before that, like CXL and Lawn Starter, real early stage, and everything we did was pretty scrappy. And then when I would try those same things at HubSpot, I'd get a little slap on the wrist, because there's so much more for a big brand to lose. But then when I would get buy-in on whatever tactics, like say, for HubSpot's blog, for a long time, nobody wanted to look salesy. So it was very difficult to get people to write any sort of product related terms, best live chat software, best form builders, even though we sold products that were related to those things. But once we got buy-in, like we could write those things and immediately rank for them. So it's like, it took 6 months to get the buy-in and the approval and the quality assurance and brand checks. But once we were there, it was so much more smooth than it would be if I was working with, say an early stage startup in that arena.
Yeah, agreed. It's almost convincing people. That's an interesting navigation now in remote life, is like, how do we help these companies get things done when we can't? Well, we're 100% remote now, but talking to people and getting like major projects pushed through is an interesting dynamic. That's tough for them as well, but more and more of those companies are going back in office. So hopefully we can, even if we're remote, we can eventually visit them to help get that across the line.
For sure. So thinking about agency growth, it sounds like design's locked in, a lot of the brand stuff in terms of like these bigger logos you're locking in. How are you thinking about, like, are there problems and challenges that you don't feel you've solved yet that you're working through? For example, for us, like one thing that we get asked constantly is like, all right, we've got traffic coming in, we've got high intent terms, but how do we like drive more conversions? So with my background in CRO, I'm night and day thinking like, how do we come up with a framework to drive more actual leads from this content? So it's the content conversion problem. Are there challenges or problems you're thinking through in terms of your services that you feel like you haven't quite gotten yet?
Yeah, good question. And that's a a common challenge or thought process for us as well with content marketing that I literally just did a training for the team on that on Friday to speak to that. But for us, something I see being increasingly important is UX design. So we're doing more blog framework design and development for people. And it's kind of an not infant stage, but it's building product line for us. So trying to get clients to make changes to their design and getting those changes approved, also getting clients to understand that this $50K upfront investment is worth doing when they don't go in the door through that has been a challenge, and it's something we're kind of ironing out. Also ironing out the processes internally is not straightforward, but that's something we think about as it's not just the writing, it's not just the design, it's also the framework where that stuff lives. I feel like has overlap with what we do, and as everything gets more competitive, it feels more important to have like every single check mark checked to win, as far as we're seeing.
Yeah, I have seen, I don't know if this is related to what you're saying exactly, but I have seen that in terms of your Twitter and your podcast, you definitely have an eye for the holistic, the strategy, the program. But I've noticed you in particular, you tweet about like very micro elements of the content and how the UX should be done in terms of like, properly formatting, properly writing, even tips around like, I think you had some framework around like how to start the intro paragraph, right? So you have a keen attention for detail on some of this stuff.
Thank you. Yeah, I with agency, and you talked about frameworks earlier. I mean, I think that's helpful. That thing I tweeted, I was like, what is an acronym we can have that sort of works with training our team and something they can remember? So like there's common things and stories our team has started to remember over time. Like we use ADA all the time, and even our pitches, and ironically hadn't been using as much as we could have been in copy in our articles. So effectively that's just sort of ADA repositioned in a way, which was always share a preview, proof, and benefit in kind of that early stage of copy. But I do think search is effectively pattern matching. So that's probably my mindset as an old school SEO, is like to see what users want and Google wants is kind of pattern matching all the same things you see in the search result, the content, the copy. And I guess my mind kind of goes that direction with looking at what success factors common sites have, and then trying to do those ourselves.
So some of those, right? Like some of the frameworks that you're pattern matching here are quite old. Like ADA it's been around for a while. I would even say I wouldn't say old, but like it's a lot of first principle stuff, right? So creating a website and reader experience that is top notch, matching the intent of the keyword, to the page that you're creating. How much of your thinking in terms of like how you're approaching content strategy reflects, I guess, first principles and long-term ideas like that? And how much do you care about like Google algorithm updates and like new models? Like Pillar and Cluster is a couple of years old now, but right, there's content and SEO frameworks coming out all the time. How much do you pay attention to like the up and coming, I don't want to like bias my answer by calling it noise, but you know what I mean? Like there's a lot of news coming out, and there's a lot of SEO news in particular. Do you pay attention to that, or how do you approach that?
I do pay attention to it. I wouldn't say there's a ton of focus on it. I mean, some of the UX stuff I think is part of that pattern matching in a way where it sort of feels like the winning sites they're faster on average. They're lighter. Like you get a quick answer immediately on page. So those are things that I do pay attention to, is like what is changing, but most of it's not some major update. It's just kind of a quality signal that's kind of how I see it, is the bar is just going to is going to go higher over time. So we're seeing that evolution. So we have to think about what will be that next bar. But I don't think what I know recently Google was talking about, or people were talking about Google changed title tags, paid no attention to that relatively as compared to how do we keep helping our clients move the bar higher? But how about you? Curious how you think about that.
I'm such a simple man. I listened to a podcast you did with Neville, and I think he mentioned like, hey, isn't it just content and links? And to an extent, I think like the 80-20 Pareto principle, that's true. So for me, like I tend to think of things in the most simplistic terms, because I think there's some utility in the margins in terms of like some algorithm updates do matter for certain industries, and some do matter in terms of like content practices that may have been outdated. But if I'm looking at the long game of what Google's trying to do, or at least purportedly trying to do, it's like to deliver the best content for the keyword at hand. So if we just keep creating content that matches the intent of the keyword, that is, high quality, best in the world content, and build links to it, I look at that as the fundamentals, and then we can worry about the margins later. And those things usually fall into place, and, unless there's some drastic like penalty or rank dropping or something like that. So I'm into the simplicity stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. And that's one reason we're going up market too, is like, that's a subtle thing now, is like, you could do those things, but if there's this brand underlying it that's not going to win long term, I'm noticing that being a thing where we're trying to make bets on who Google and users want to win. So that's one reason we've gotten more selective. Is I don't think we stress about the updates as much anymore, because we're lucky to, and also are being selective such that those things don't suddenly blank out our clients. And I'm known for saying knock on wood a lot, but I feel like I should say that again.
Are there major things? So you've got more longevity here working with clients. Are there major things that have changed about how you approach content and SEO driven content in the last 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, it's the slow transition of just like, we would do more pure link bait stuff that was only link focused. That's how we started. And we wouldn't associate that with search volume. They'd almost be these different things. Then we slowly migrated to this Venn diagram where we're trying to get search volume in there. And then we realized, we started measuring the difference between the two and the economics of just getting things to rank and driving that long term. And also, like, it's just probably plain to see that's what Google wants, is like passive link engine type sites compared to manual outreach. So that is kind of how it progressed. And then as it's gotten more competitive, thinking about the layout updates and things of those nature to like further optimize for that. The passive link intent topics up front is more of what we do. Yeah, that evolution has kind of progressed over time, and trying to connect it to the site. Like, I've seen a lot of businesses be built and kind of decline because they were just thinking about links isolated, and we're pulling it all together to be successful.
I have a similar question. So with that pattern recognition from the last 10 years, do you have any like kind of wild conjectures about where content's moving in the future? So there's some ideas around like, Google's increasingly creating more and more space, basically scraping content and, like creating microsites almost for some keywords. Or there's like the trend of artificial intelligence driven content, and like, that's like creating blog posts from scratch. Like, do you have any kind of out there, maybe like 5-10 year trends that you're thinking about?
Not real. I mean, I'm pretty iterative. It feels like the world moves pretty fast, but most of this stuff, if you're like paying attention to it, you can ride with it. In my experience, like, I've tried the AI driven content marketing. We've thought about how we can incorporate it in our process. We haven't completely given up on it. I'm not seeing a ton of immediate value that wouldn't kind of distract our team in a way. So that hasn't got a lot of focus. I think most of our process is like SERP intent analysis for our topics. So if that stuff changes over time, I think how we would operate would change with it. And some of those things are kind of like they're sending early signals. Like, as you mentioned in microsites, I see like visuals more often on some like ideas keywords. We'd already built a lot of visuals, so it might send traffic differently, but hopefully still successful.
You're already in front of that trend by being visually focused.
Yeah. And think about the SERP, because if Google knows it's visual and we already sort of were thinking visuals, might redistribute how our clients get the traffic. But I don't think you're like completely missing the mark by at least thinking what that SERP is doing. But right. You're curious how you're thinking about that and moving towards the puck.
Yeah, it's tough. So I think like there's merits to all of these, but my question is like, how does that change what we're doing? And typically the answer is not much. So I try to like keep an eye on some of these trends. I've played around with some of the AI generated copy tools as well. For writing long form, especially thought leadership blog posts, it's not there yet. I think maybe for some small snippets, for idea generation, I don't have the problem of like staring at a blank page and not knowing what to write. I tend to like dive in right away.
Yeah.
So I think if you have writer's block, something like that could be amazing for just getting words on paper. I do have this like wacky idea in the back of my head where I kind of want to buy like a domain and just see if I can fully outsource content production to like, a virtual assistant who runs every piece through Ahrefs, ClearScope, and then Jarvis, and just see like where it goes. I don't think that's probably going to be successful yet, but I think it would be interesting. The search intent one's probably the big one for me, and also like brand signals. But one thing I'm thinking through, and I constantly ideate about like creating a tool around this, and kind of fiddled around with that when I was at HubSpot, is a lot of that process is still pretty manual. I found like matching the search intent to the SERPs. Is that manual for y'all too? Or do you have a tool that can like kind of signify like, all right, is this like a transactional? Is this going to be high intent? Is this going to be like top of funnel? Or is that still pretty much just like Google the search term and see like, is it product pages? Is it information? Like what's ranking?
Yeah, it's relatively manual. I mean, we use Ahrefs as our kind of like North Star tool, but I know there's tools like Market Muse and things like that will kind of give you those things. They're generally pretty expensive. I think with a lot of these things, it's like you can automate, but there's some value in just, if you're writing it, doing that work and learning from it. Because if you don't, you lose a part of that in that discovery, and it's not that hard to do one search for that topic,
right?
Such that seems instructive.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think I agree with that in terms of like automating the content production too. I mean, I guess there's certain terms that you do want just a quick answer, but I also find that like even if you're writing for search, there's still some je ne sais quoi. There's still some intangible element that a writer can put into the piece, right? Whether that's a style, whether that's like a particular viewpoint or quotes from experts. I do feel like if you just generated it from like basically rehashed Wikipedia articles, it wouldn't have the same resonance. Maybe if it's on a huge website that's just going to rank easily anyway. But yeah, I think there's something intangible about doing some of this manually.
For sure. And yeah, the tools will always have some value, and those things are worth keeping an eye on. Like, and to your point, the AI driven stuff, like we've considered and even recommend it for some clients. Like if you have super long tail city pages that need like 100 words of copy or something, and have 50 searches a month, like maybe a tool like that's then edited could be valuable.
Like product descriptions or something where it's like you've got thousands of SKUs or something like that.
Exactly. But you should have never hired an agency like us or you for that task, because it is so commoditized at that point. So it's effectively like maybe it's competing for the commodity work, but not the high end trying to win that commodity work. Yeah.
I have the Peter Thiel question here. What do you believe to be true about content marketing that most people would disagree with you about?
Interesting. That's a tough one off the top of my head. I mean, I do say a lot that we're so design focused. Like people see words as content marketing, and I see content marketing as the whole experience of design, copy, etc. And for sure, it's less accurate, and the copy gets more weighted in these very technical spaces. So I totally fully understand that. But I think there probably are a lot of people proceeding as if content marketing was just, I need to go hire this freelance writer. And I don't think that's really what creates success most of the time, and especially in B2C.
Gotcha. Yeah, I like that. All right, so I'm going to ask a couple of questions on like client stuff, client acquisition for the agency, and your marketing, because you said you're focusing more on marketing yourself. And I've noticed, one, you do a very like high production video and podcast, and then also I've noticed a lot more tweets and LinkedIn stuff from you. So how are you thinking about growing your personal brand? Do you think about this proactively? Is it strategically focused? Do you plan ahead? How does all that wrap up into Siege's marketing?
So the answer is, in the last 6 months, been not really. We haven't done as much because of that thing I kind of led with, that I've been so fragmented in our focus. And thankfully we had gotten to the snowball effect that we had so much referrals and me just randomly sharing a tweet or a blog post that it didn't matter. But that that's not sustainable. It's not what I should be doing. So my goal is to do that more so. I think with things like you're doing, things that I had done when we were doing more planning, I'd do these interview series like you're doing. I'd be deliberate about, it wouldn't even necessarily have a huge audience reach, but if that person could be a lead source, hey, turns out I just sent you a lead. Is that coincidence? Maybe not.
Right.
That you get deeper relationships with people through just that. That was one strategic thing we did. Definitely high quality production value. I think that kind of connects to that upmarket kind of thing we're trying to go for. Overall, yeah, we started doing these takedowns at one point where we're kind of breaking down websites. I actually got some negative feedback about that because you're not going to get a client from someone saying, or maybe you can, but the way I positioned it of it being negative, like most of those people are offended by saying, do this and this better. We've kind of repositioned it into, here are some adjacent people where, like, for example, I was going to do one on brides.com coming up. Anyone in the wedding space that's in that space, which is lucrative and big, could reach out to us, or maybe brides.com is at least complemented by that. They probably don't need the help directly, but who knows? Maybe that leads to referrals or word of mouth as compared to the negative kind of touch point of you need to improve this and this and this. But I've seen people do it well, so I think there's multiple ways.
With the breakdowns, were you emailing the people afterwards and like using that as sort of sales enablement, sales collateral, or was it just sort of like hoping that people would come in and see that?
I would tag them on those networks. It does feel like tagging anyone kind of lowers your reach on most social networks these days. So I hadn't done that. At times I did, but it's one of those things with more time, would circle back to that because I do think it's a smart strategy to email it to them.
That's something we've been wanting to try. And I am kind of obsessed with the very concise, targeted account-based marketing approach. We had Andy Crestodina on our office hours little virtual webinar series a couple months ago. And he says he's seeing smashing success doing basically original research for like a very small niche. So he'll take like email marketing software tools and just do like, an analysis. He's like, web design. So like he'll analyze all their websites on like multiple dimensions, get them on a webinar and like do this whole original piece of content there. I love that. I want to try it. I want to try the teardowns. It's like all this agency marketing, especially if you're going for the high end, is so fucking time consuming. Like I've never found, like I can't find a scalable tactic. And maybe that's like a feature. Maybe it's like the people who are willing to roll up their sleeves and do that stuff. Maybe they're the ones who do get the bigger clients. Yeah.
I mean, social does compound, like Twitter and LinkedIn. I think there is effectiveness, and I've thought about it with video and some of the, like sometimes video, it's not worth going that deep and or that high quality when you can just share a tweet that's like 280 characters or whatever and get strong reach. It probably doesn't go as deep in terms of actually building trust and things like that. So there's pros and cons, but those things are real. I've seen people just repeat, like Pep has done a good job of that. It seems like
he's so good at that.
Yeah.
No, he said on a recent podcast too, because he's got this. Have you listened to his podcast? It's like really well produced, right? Oh, you were on his podcast. That's right. Of course you've listened to it. He was talking about how obviously CXL built their brand on content marketing and like, thousands and thousands of hundreds of thousands of visitors a month. But he mentioned something about how he poured hours and hours of time into a blog post that he thought was one of the best he'd ever done. And he looked at the analytics and he's like, it's a couple thousand people. I get that on one LinkedIn post or like one tweet. So we kind of started thinking through like the cost benefits trade-off there. And I've been thinking through something similar. It's like, do I spend a couple days to a couple of weeks writing a long form blog post when I don't know it's going to land? So the idea that I'm coming up with is sort of a decentralized content approach. Or that's the term that we're trying to coin for it. And it's sort of fractal. So like the least amount of time I can spend on the input and the more I can repurpose that when the feedback actually resonates, the better. So if I can do like a short podcast with the co-founders on an idea like decentralized content and then do a tweet about that, and then I see that it's getting traction, then it's like, oh, okay, maybe we can write a blog post on this now. But until then, it's like, I don't know, unless you've already built up the brand that, a 2,000, 3,000 word blog post is going to have the same kind of expected value nowadays.
Yeah, I think that's fair, especially in B2B. I think I've actually done that a decent amount. So I'll tweet something and it will connect, and then I'll then create a video off of it. Ironically, it seems like the video doesn't do as well. It's probably because I'm re-promoting the same idea in a smaller audience. But that doesn't mean like in the context of your website that doesn't have value, strong value, because clearly it resonated with someone originally. But it's that re-promotion of the same idea that I've felt. It's not that it does badly, but that's just the one thing I've noticed with that. But I would agree. Like in general, it seems like this halo effect of like all this brand, you still should do this. Like, I don't think you, or really I should be doing search driven stuff. But for those 90 DR sites, maybe a little bit more.
Right. Maybe if the market's a little larger, the total addressable market, because there's only a subset of clients that are actually going to be, worthwhile for agencies like ours anyway.
Right.
So do y'all do SEO and content for your own site, or?
No. I mean, we sort of like tried to not fall on our face for a while, but then, literally no effort on it for a long time. We kind of wung it. Some of the articles perform and did nothing, but then you realize you're up against Moz, Hrefs. We can't win for those unless we're spending so much effort on that. And the leads are so low quality relatively. We'll occasionally like have pages that I'm not going to be mad if they rank for things, but we're not putting a lot of effort into it. Compared to, just like a few tweets and thought leadership, that makes a lot more sense.
Exactly the same as us. In fact, we actually started doing SEO driven content when we were trying to scale up and like build an inbound channel. So we have a bunch of articles on the site that are like what is content marketing and stuff like that. They didn't rank. And then also just an intuitive idea that I had was, if they did, how many people that are searching what is content marketing are going to pay $10,000 a month for content marketing, right? Like the sales cycle on that, it's going to be like a couple of years out, and there's going to be no attributable value to that blog post. So whereas like maybe that person could sign up for a free trial on SEMrush or Ahrefs or something like that. So maybe they can capture value from that keyword, but in like a high-end services business, it just didn't make sense to me. So we've kind of gone the opposite direction and paused a lot of that content in favor of more of the thought leadership stuff.
Yeah, we're similar. We even had something on like how to increase website traffic, which was this like hero piece of content for us that I occasionally updated. And it was ranking well against very competitive, because I put like all my time and effort to it. And I don't think we ever really got a lead that converted from it, despite a few kind of like knocks on the door, like for something that you would think would tie to services. Not really. Search, I think it's mostly top funnel for us. You kind of want it, but not really something to invest in deeply.
Maybe you get some brand awareness, like the HubSpot play, where it's like just appear everywhere for all terms, and eventually they'll see that orange logo and say, well, I do need a CRM. And I've seen them several times.
Yeah. For HubSpot, for services, probably not as much. So you don't want to not do it. Yeah, but go ahead.
Yeah. So what is your ideal client? Like, what are the signals that somebody is a prospect you'd want to work with?
We look at the TAM. So are they doing, say, 100,000 a month in search or more? Or could they be doing that if they're a brand new startup based on what the audience looks like? Did they recently raise funding and that exists? Are they probably would love to have people that have over 30 employees, probably 100 plus now, because under 30 is like high risk. Not an affiliate site. We used to take those on. Now we don't take them on at all because they're high churn risk. Are they going to win long-term? So we look at the product. Do we like it? What are the reviews of that company? Even looking at subtle things like, what are the Glassdoor reviews of the site? Like, will they treat our team well? Those are kind of signals we're also looking at, because team retention is just so important. And all those things, I think, directly relate to how some of these companies do in the long term as it gets more important.
Yeah, I love that. One thing that we found, and this is still a hypothesis, but we found that people who already have somebody working on content are better clients. And I don't know, that was actually paradoxical. It's what I would have thought. I would have thought that like a director of marketing comes in and they're like, we want to outsource this function fully. But I found that if we're working with like a generalist director of demand gen or marketing, they tend to look at it as a test. And I actually listened to a podcast you put out recently on this, which is like, you can't really test content marketing as a channel. it's a strategy, and you've kind of got to dive in, or you're not going to see the results. And then if we're working with a founder directly or an executive, it's like they're probably too small, and that founder is going to realize, shit, I've got to raise the next round. Like, I can't spend time editing each blog post that these guys hand us. So that was a little paradoxical to me, and I'm still not totally sure that's 100% true, but we now tend to look whether they're actively doing content already. Well, the other thing is that if they're doing content, we don't need to sell them on the idea of content, which is always a big battle if you have to do that.
Yeah, I like that. For us, I'm sure someone's going to listen to this that falls into this, so don't be offended. But SEO people are generally not good clients for us. We prefer general marketers, because SEO people are just like, we want links, and that's all we care about. And we want that Venn diagram, because it's tough in the link world to be held to like 20 links a month and hit that number. That's a huge amount of stress for link building teams each month. And often it's also ironically, maybe not ironically, but people who come in the door through links actually don't perform well, because they're not connecting the two of like the quality of the site and things like that. So we saw that pretty consistently. So that I think SEOs are getting better and better at that, but that was kind of a persona type that we still get because I'm an SEO, but is not as positive in recent history.
We've had that as well, and it is stressful. It's the best when you can just get like kind of all the nodes in the system together. So the content strategy and plan, production, promotion, and optimization. But some people come in with very specific desires and needs. So when a client comes in like that, it doesn't have to be just like, we want 20 links a month, but how do you approach like goal setting when it comes to clients? Maybe they want something specific, like we want 20% growth month over month traffic, or we only want more free trials, or like they have very specific goals. Like how do you work with them in terms of expectation setting and mapping those things out?
Yeah, I mean, some of those we'll just pass on. If it's just a link focused person, that could be a red flag. So might pass on them, might take a few calls and try to redirect them and see how up on that they are, but that could be a red flag. We do have a specific model for building ROI for them around links and content. So we see a link is worth 10,000 a month or 8,000 a month, and we can generate 8 a month or whatever the number is a month. We can create an ROI equation with using traffic value on Ahrefs. So that's one thing we do very commonly, and traffic as well. We'll do the same with content. If links is like that equation isn't as strong, but content is, say the traffic value for what is content marketing is probably like a couple 100,000 a month, but maybe more average things are like 5,000 a month. So we do 10 pieces of content each month, and it's 5,000 per month. We can start building like an ROI equation to pitch against them. We won't get into the granular details of like, we're going to generate 20 free trials per month at that stage. And we don't often get pressed on that, but curious how do you guys do that, and how do you think about it?
We do it similarly. We really try to map to ROI without giving very concrete, specific targets, especially when it comes to trials. Like there's so many things that can affect that, down to like the landing page or the seasonality of the business. We typically map it out in 3 dimensions, which is like a leading indicator of website rankings, or really like we'll go with the input level. It's like, are we placing the links? Are we writing the content? And are you qualitatively cool with that? And then the next step would be like, are the keywords we're going after that we've agreed to, are they starting to rank? And then there's the organic traffic layer. Are we increasing organic traffic? And we usually map that out on some sort of a growth model based on like the predicted click-through and search volume for those terms, just to get some loose approximation. And then finally, we do the macro goal, the lagging indicator, which is like how many leads, or we mainly work with B2B or customers for B2C, are we actually producing from a last click basis from this content? Which we always, caveat that with like the content's probably producing much more, but we're just going to show like the directly attributable stuff. And that's really like the last thing. Like we don't usually see results for that, definitely not in the first 5 to 6 months, but that's like the long-term thing they care about. So we usually give them like a dashboard for that as well.
Nice. Yeah, that's one thing we we are kind of trying to dig in deeper and do more technical B2B and expand more in B2B. And something I've noticed in my ROI calculations, and curious if you see this as well. And I hear John Henry Shirk say similar of like, it's a little bit simpler to use traffic value as a metric in B2C. I don't know if it's just probably just first touch attribution is easier. So maybe more is being spent on PPC that makes those numbers easier. But like in B2B, the numbers generally seem a little lower on Ahrefs and places like that. So it feels like you're underrepresenting your value to just say the traffic value is 20K a month or something.
B2B is tough too. I don't know where this study was, and I can link to it once I find it after this, but I saw a study where somebody took like 3 different SEO tools and searched like, I don't know, 100 or 1,000 B2B related keywords. And like the traffic volume estimate was just wildly variable for these terms. And then like when they would rank for them, they would notice that the traffic is way different than the estimates from the tools. So, and I found that with HubSpot, by the way, like some of this play that I was doing with publishing a lot more product-led content. I remember specifically there was a search keyword that was like 100 search volume. I barely got it on the roadmap. Like it was, just kind of a throwaway thing. And that listicle ended up it was like number 5 or number 4 top performing blog post of any of the content in the last 10 years in terms of like driving freemium growth. So I think that stuff's really hard to predict, especially given the SEO tools and especially given the B2B niche, I guess, like, because a lot of those high intent terms show up as like sub 200 search volume, and those rarely get prioritized in the roadmap. So it is really tough. I think attribution and optimization are kind of underinvested areas in content, and those are just really tricky problems that we're hoping to chip away at, I think, because those are always like what you're, and in the end, gold on. It's like, do they like you, and are you producing those numbers, and can you show that you're producing those numbers for them? So
that was an area we thought about exploring, and I even interviewed some people over time. Was an analytics position, like thinking about that, evangelizing as a service offering. Probably still is something there, to your point. I just never got far enough, but it's clear there's value there, especially probably maybe even more so on the B2B side to clearly quantify. Because if you can quantify your value, you can charge more and harder to replace for sure.
You've got it. Yeah. So speaking of results and like timeline, we know that content takes longer than say paid acquisition PPC to get that feedback loop. I say it's like gardening versus hunting, right? Like you've got a long cycle before you actually see the results pop through.
It's a good analogy.
So how do you handle that in the initial months? Like I'm sure there's but most people at this point that are hiring agencies for this price point probably understand that it's going to be a little bit longer of a cycle. But how do you handle, that expectation to show results in the first couple of months? Do you do anything particular to show the clients that you're moving in the right direction even before you can attribute, ROI to that content?
We do something called a keyword opposition and benefit analysis, where we're looking at the keyword difficulty in month 1 of like say 100 to 200 topics, depending on the vertical. That will allow us to prioritize things that hopefully can rank faster. So that's part of the equation. There are leading indicators with like link building driven content when we are doing manual outreach that they see we're getting quality links. So they know something's going to come down the pipe if that's a leading indicator. We do say that you should be able to see rankings start to show, like page 3, page 2, that should start to happen, even if you don't have traffic right away. So that's a kind of common and should happen hopefully pretty quickly. And you do expectation set in the initial proposal of like traffic will be here. We don't go as granular saying month 2, you're going to have this traffic, because I think that would create a lot of stress for the team. We do point like 12 months out, like this is where you should be. We will set link goals also, like it's going to ramp up like a graph up into that final number. But thankfully we don't get a ton of pressure, and that might have to do with that expectation setting up front.
Right. Larger clients, larger time horizons in the first place. I think that's what I try to explain, both internally and when I'm speaking to clients, is like, it sounds like we're just pushing for a longer deal, but it really like aligns incentives for both of us. So we're actually allowed the space and time to create better content and allow you guys more space to like, have the expectations properly set. So in months 6 through 12, I mean, like the results are going to seem exponentially better than the results from month 0 through 6, just by the sheer nature of how SEO works. It truly is like a garden, like an iceberg, rising up through. It's like the first couple of months, it's barely peeking through. And then all of a sudden it's like, holy shit, we're ranking for everything.
Yeah. It is that balance. I can understand the client, and it's like finding that navigation, because their fear is you don't want to wake up in 12 months and have nothing, which there's definitely many people that have done that, right? So it's like, how do you that balance? And that's probably where you start building trust as an agency and things like that. Thankfully, they start having a little more trust of that timeline, for sure.
What's the most annoying client questions that you get?
Something we get relatively commonly. We do build a FAQ document. I think I realize I don't have it on my FAQ, but they ask us to promote their content a lot. So very often there won't have an outreach market associated. There won't be design assets associated. It will be too promotional, too heavy-handed. So that will cause us to not have success. So we get that question a lot, and probably on us to like better expectations set. And we're going to do a podcast on that.
Wait, soon, so you mean like the content itself is too promotion heavy? Like it's kind of like a product related piece?
Exactly.
So it's like, best live chat software, and it's like from Live Chat Inc. or something like that.
Right. So like if I'm cold pitching that to some communication site, realistically, I'm going to be like, this is just an ad for this company, so I'm not going to link to it. Right. In the context of how we pitch things. I know maybe you could do that through some guest posts or something, but that's not really how we pitch it.
And you guys have an FAQ document that's on your website, or that's something that you give clients on kind of month 1 on kickoff?
It's a sales collateral piece. So we'll send it to them as part of the sales communication.
That's interesting. I'm going to take that idea. I like the idea of an FAQ. We get that as well in terms of frequently asked questions that I should probably just write a blog post about. Definitely the how do you do link building and all of the nitty gritty around that is a common one. And then like the how soon how soon can we expect results that's not an annoying question. I totally understand it, but it's one of those where it's like, I could definitely just write like a formulaic answer on that one.
We get that question. And I agree that when I hear that scares me about that's a high churn risk client that says, if they're asking that question, they're probably ready to eject. That's one of the reasons why we started qualifying like over 30 employees and things like that. It's like, you don't want to be an expensive line item. And for them, they don't hire things that are an expensive line item either, that you have to ask that question for. You're just not ready to invest in that. That's okay. But
yeah, that's something that I actually talked to a prospect about. Is basically they don't want they don't want to work with clients who perceive them to be like their highest cost item, because it's going to be very stressful for both sides. Like you want it to feel like a comfortable investment. Otherwise, there's just going to be far too much micromanagement and far too much expectations in terms of like, all right, can we see the ROI immediately? This is our highest purchase in terms of our like P&L here.
Agreed. Yeah. And I would agree that it goes the other direction. Like huge clients are not good either. Then you feel pressure. You can't increase prices on them. Lots of navigating.
And if you lose them, you're in this like flustered, like, what do we do now? How do we replace that?
Exactly. And that's something we've thankfully been pretty good at over time, is not have anyone that's too big for that reason.
So on more of the personal side, what who are you chasing? What's your long game?
I'm enjoying the work. Like that's, I like being an SEO and content marketer. I enjoy that a lot, and getting back in the weeds and doing that side of things is something I'm excited about in kind of this new role now that we've hired a COO. So yeah, it's interesting having done this for 9.5 years. Definitely resetting and like getting out of the operations side of the agency life is stressful, but I don't have a clear endpoint. I know it's cliche to be like the process kind of thing, but thankfully have done pretty well in the 9.5 years been doing this. And now it's mostly about do great work, help our team grow. That's fulfilling. I think you have to love people in agency life as well. And as long as that's the case, hopefully I'll be doing this for 5-10 more years.
I love it. So I started out by asking you what the day in the life is. So it sounds like you're really just chasing like the ideal day in the same company. Like that's really the ideal model. So do you have an ideal day? Like what's your dream like Saturday or whatever, or your dream Tuesday? I guess.
Tuesday. Not many meetings, working, probably no meetings, to be honest. Maybe one. Like I do enjoy training where I'll just be like heads down working on like a process or I know I said I don't like operations, but like content marketing strategy process is like, I find a lot of joy of like, oh, did we just improve 50 people doing this thing for all of our clients? That's exciting to me. So writing, doing that, sharing content, hopefully that content is received well when I share it. That's a positive. Just having that flow state of like working on a big project heads down is like most enjoyable to me. But what's that look like for you?
I think I'm chasing the flow state as well. I think through working at a corporate job, I've realized that I really dislike looking forward to a week filled with meetings. Like anything on my calendar, it seems to like weigh a little burden in the back of my mind where I can't fully immerse myself in the task at hand. And I find when I'm happiest and most fulfilled, it's like whether it's writing an article and just 3 hours later I look up, I'm like, whoa, where did the time go? Or I mean, coding or digital analytics, whatever I'm doing, I love to like immerse myself in that. So I think the ideal day for me would look like, I know Arnold Schwarzenegger and Mark Andreessen both talked about this, where they actually, for a while, I think, I don't know if they do this still, refuse to schedule anything. And like, if you wanted to take a meeting with them, you would have to like call them that day and say like, hey, can we do a meeting? And like, if they didn't feel like it, they wouldn't do it. And if they did, they'd be like, all right, let's meet right now. And I kind of love that. I don't know if that would get stressful eventually, but I like that ethos, and I like that as kind of a desired end state. Who knows if it's ever accomplishable, but I think that's probably what I would work towards too. And, spending time like writing, reading, thinking, forward facing kind of innovative products and services that we could offer. And then networking. Like I love doing the conferences and like the coffee meetups and all that stuff.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's kind of just like talking to people that are smart at doing this stuff is enjoyable, and like that a lot. It's something I've built to, or I was doing sales. We just delegated that to someone very smart who's been in our team for a while. I'm still helping out, but hopefully even less sales calls and things like that. So I can focus on pretty much that same Venn diagram that you got.
Yeah. Weirdly enough, I actually like sales. I found that to be enjoyable. I think it's because it's small scale. And if I were doing it all day, every day with like my meeting my calendar completely filled with meetings, it wouldn't be fun. But that kind of satisfies that people part just a little bit, at least at the scale I'm doing it.
Yeah, that's true. I enjoyed it for a long time. Don't get me wrong. I think that's probably part of the evolution. I don't know if you know, his name is like Andrew something. He had this great thread recently where he's a super popular guy. I forget the name off.
And Wilkinson, Andrew Wilkinson.
Yes. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. The burnout thing.
Yes. So he wrote like he was doing so well and like everything was going well. And his argument was like all this dopamine release, like stop creating joy. And it's rough, but like, it's weird. I no longer get any kind of dopamine release when we sell a client or close a client. It's strange. I think probably is like over time kind of got there. So it's like refunneling around where you get that release, but that's a really interesting thread. You should link to that in show notes.
Dude, I've been feeling the same thing because I've been listening to the same podcast that inspired that thread too. All the Dr. Andrew Huberman stuff on dopamine and Anna Lemke. And I felt the same thing. And that's interesting because we were talking about social and thought leadership and like being on all these platforms. And I have such a double-edged sword there because I know that it works for my business and I know that it's effective for driving thought leadership and clients, but I hate spending so much time on Twitter and LinkedIn. It's just like that flood of information at all times. Do you deal with that too?
Yeah, it's definitely a two-sided coin. I know it feels like there's definitely a contradiction in there somewhere of that. I don't actively just sit on Twitter and scan it or LinkedIn for sure, but I think most people would be lying that are successful. Like you share something, you're going to like refresh it and see how it's going. And that can become addicting
when you get all the notifications. Yeah.
And then you get addicted and refresh it and distracted and all of those things. So It's a tough balance for sure. So that's what, kind of focusing inward, which I think is good. It's also good for probably service. Like, I really do believe you can be very, very successful, especially once you've hit a certain flywheel, which I'm sure you guys will get there, of like enough momentum of referrals and things where you just looked inward and improved your processes all day and all night. Like, I don't even think you even need that much outward marketing, to be honest. And it's probably far more exciting for clients to have a client that thinks of them that way versus the reverse. But you still got to do both. You can't give it up. But
well, especially during the scaling phase, for sure, you need to get to that point where you've got the base and like the constant referral pipeline and inbound pipeline, and that's what or at least personally, I'm working towards. And then, luckily, like you mentioned before, we've got co-founders, one fully focused on services and one essentially fully focused on operations. So that at least gives me like the freedom to put my head up and kind of go outward. But eventually, I think it would be really nice if I could just schedule my tweets and go off and maybe do some more deep work and client work.
That used to be a strategy that I employed that maybe I'll go back to if I start flying more. Or has like suggest scheduling content. It can be dangerous. Schedule content when you're on a flight or something. Because that way you'll just wake up and all of the notifications will have happened and hopefully nothing was broken. But that'll be optimal for not getting stuck in the black hole.
For sure. Would you want to do a couple of rapid fire, unrelated to content questions?
Sure.
Cool. So they're not technically rapid fire. Like you can take as long as you want to answer them, but I just call them rapid fire. So who do you admire professionally and why?
Will Reynolds comes top of mind. Sierra Interactive just has done it. It's like 10 years ahead. Clearly cares about his team. Does the right things, is like handing his company back to his people as well. Clearly cares about his clients as well. So much admiration for Will.
If you could create your own category in Jeopardy, what would it be? And would you get every question right?
Wow. I probably would not, because I'm not good at random trivia, but I guess if I'm rigging the game, you could do SEO. I tell my what, and it's definitely true. I'm like literally good at one thing, probably, hopefully getting better at parenting, but SEO and content marketing, most of the other things I'm just not very good at.
You ever talk to people who don't work in digital marketing and SEO and try to like explain what you do? It's the most frustrating and like awful thing. So you've got so much like inside, just like weird jargon and stuff. Some of my friend group, they're like, my friend Mark is also an SEO, and we'll go on tangents about like page rank sculpting or something. And they're like, guys, I have no idea what you're talking about.
I always use the analogy of trying to rank for shoes, and we help companies rank higher for shoes. So you buy their shoes. And that's my mom explanation.
I love that. Which talent would you most like to have?
Oh, it would have been cool. I played Division III football in college at a small school. And if I was maybe like 3 inches taller, maybe slightly bigger frame, I could have played offensive line maybe. So maybe
nice.
That.
Where did you go to school?
Chapman University in Orange County, California.
Nice.
Yeah.
Do you consider yourself more scientific or artistic?
That's an interesting one. I cop out answer, but I feel like somewhat Venn diagram of that. And then I'm sort of data driven. I'm not great on either side, but somewhere in the middle. Sort of artistic because we were running a creative agency, but then using data and ROI. I think there's at least an argument that maybe that's accurate.
I think that's what makes an effective growth-focused marketer, for sure. I mean, that's what I look towards, and especially like experimentation and CRO people tend to have this like wild, mad scientist side. Well, I guess yeah. So they have both. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. I actually did A/B testing a lot at my last company, and I'm not an A/B tester, but maybe there's a little bit of that in my soul as well.
Well, that's science for sure.
Yeah.
If you could have dinner with one person, dead or alive, who would it be? Neville Ravikant stands out as one person. Probably is not the ultimate answer, but he came quickly. I do like Andrew Wilkinson, and now he's even impressed me even more that he had that kind of self aha. But he's very
clearly smart business person. But people that are happy and successful, I don't think there's like super, which both those guys, and maybe Andrew not as much, but happy and successful is kind of like the North Star.
Well, they seem like they've got a good balance, and have really thought through their desired ideal day. I know actually Andrew Wilkinson specifically, that's why I asked you the question on the ideal day, is I got that inspiration from him. He wrote a Medium post a long time ago where when he was building his agency, MetaLab, he thought through what his ideal work life would look like. But the way he did it was via negativa. So he thought like, what would my worst day look like? And he's like, all right, filled with meetings, urgent tasks, like blah, blah, blah. And he basically inversed that. And that's how they formed the culture at their company. So I love when people think consciously about that kind of thing and not just like, how do we grow at all costs, you know?
Yeah, that's smart. And I probably got lost in that a little too much in the last 2 years, and glad to finally like flip that switch and hopefully get back to it. But that's a great way of thinking. And probably like should set a reminder once a year to do that audit.
Totally. What do you consider the most overrated virtue?
Overrated virtue. So what would a rapid fire list of virtues be, I guess?
Yeah, see, this is one of the tough questions. I think like off the top of my head, patience, politeness, what else is a virtue? Courage, honesty.
Probably depends on the context. I just Googled it as well. I kind of would say patience is a little overrated, but then that's partially why was a bad COO effectively in the last year, is that I would move too fast on things. And then at 110 people, it's just like a terrible thing to do. In early stages, it's, I don't think being patient is necessarily that good, and moving fast is valuable, I think, even though we're in search.
I think that's true. I think it's like it scales with company size and like group size, but also I'm incredibly impatient. But I've reconciled that, and I'm like, all right, I'm going to be impatient with action and patient with results. So that's now the pithy little saying that I do.
Another framework. You just have all the frameworks. Clients love frameworks. Teams love frameworks.
Exactly. What's a career choice you considered but didn't pursue?
Went to Chapman because it had a film school. So that was a route. Did creative writing, which kind of goes to content marketing, then sold out and changed the business. So probably writing. Wanted to be a writer. So I guess maybe I still pursued that. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Do you still aspire to, writing a book or any sort of creative writing?
Yeah, maybe. I think I've thought about it, maybe in the context of Siege. How about you?
I would love to eventually.
Yeah.
We've thought about it. But I talked to Brian Massey a while ago, and he told me, he's like, man, I started an agency just so I could write and speak. That's the only reason I did this. And I'm like, all right, what kind of value can I get out of running this business for my own personal goals? And it's like, well, writing a book would be a great, a very expensive business card in a way. So we've thought about doing something like that in that context. And yeah, I've always wanted to write books. It's just like, what to write about, at what time, when do I have the knowledge, when is it valuable? All of those things, I think, are big questions, because it's not like you can just sit down, in your spare time
do it.
And yeah, exactly. You can't really like half-ass it.
It clearly has value for services, it seems like, but yeah, to your point, you have to go all in. Like I've seen a few service companies, and I'm like, that seems kind of half baked what you're doing, but maybe it still is effective.
I wouldn't want to do that. I would if I wanted to do it, if I really put my time in, I would want it to be like something I'm really proud of, Yeah,
but it's in one of those things where I guess patience and short-term focus is like, if you don't self-publish, you're out, you got to spend a ton of time working on this thing. So it's like, what is that I keep saying Venn diagram, but that
what's like the opportunity cost?
Yeah. When does that feel right to do, or you're going to lose that time all up front, and then but it's a huge long-term bet. So clearly people who are willing to play those games seem to win them.
For sure. All right. Easy last one. Where can people find you online?
Twitter and LinkedIn. One of my favorite I don't know what your Twitter name is, Alex. I think it is your name, but my
That's,
favorite.
I am Alex Burkett.
Okay, nice. Close. One of my very advanced Twitter tips and LinkedIn tips is just make your username your first and last name. So mine's Ross Hudgens, at Ross Hudgens. And I think I'm just Ross Hudgens on LinkedIn. That's a little bit easier to find me. But if you find me there at siegemedia.com and our YouTube channel, would love to see you and chat content marketing.
All right. Well, that's easy. Thank you so much, Ross. This was super fun.
Yeah, this was great. Thanks for having me, Alex.